Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. I am delighted today to introduce my guest, Peter Athans. So, Peter is a performance educator with over 2 decades of experience working at world-class learning and training institutions. He's worked with athletes at the high school, Division 1 and professional level, and has also served special operators in the US Army as a cognitive enhancement specialist. Peter has a master's degree in sports psychology, is a certified mental performance consultant, CMPC, through the Association for Applied Sports Psychology, and a certified strength and conditioning specialist, CS, through the National Strength and Conditioning Association. Pete, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Good morning. Good afternoon. How's it going? Thanks for having me, Podge. This is great.
Going well. It's also very strange for me to call you Pete all my life and then introduce you as Peter into the conversation.
I go by
very
both.
formal.
It's all good.
Very formal on my behalf, but it's really good to have you here. Really good we got through the technical issues. It happens sometimes, I think we can really tie it into today's topic about when we talk about maybe mindset training and being mentally resilient and being able to adapt and overcome challenges. So we can maybe use it as a learning opportunity ourselves.
Yeah, I think always, right? It's all a learning opportunity.
Absolutely. Pete, I know you have a really extensive bio. You have experience in many areas when it comes to sports and coaching as well. But I felt rather than me just reading out almost like an essay in terms of all the achievements you've done, I think I'd love to dive in with you and just see where your passion for optimizing mental and physical performance initially came from.
Yeah. I suppose that's the best place to start. So for me, naturally, it came on the field, right? I was an athlete. I grew up in a household that was like, my parents were very much into education and us always being at school. And that was a huge priority. But like the implied message was like, when is the next game happening? So I grew up in a very, very sport centered household. For me, growing up in high school, I was a 3-sport athlete. I played football, I ran track, I wrestled. I loved them all. But football was like my thing. I love that. That's American football. I loved it. I loved it really did define me for a huge portion of my life from when I was 5 until I was 25. It was the center of my life. Who I hung out with, where I went to school, what I did on the weekends. It was all around football, and I loved it. I loved it then. I love the game today. It was a huge part of my life. Went to college to play football. I played at Sacred Heart University, was an All-American and a 4-year starter there. I had a really, really meaningful experience there. And then after college, I went on to play a little bit more professionally here in the States. And I also played a year over in Europe, which was, again, like just a really deeply meaningful experience. I always say, like, when I got out of college here, like all myself and people like me, all there was to do was go to the NFL, right? There were other options to play, but like that was obviously that was a big one. For me, I wanted to make some money, some real money, and I wanted to continue playing football. Like that was all I knew. I pursued that dream for forever. Looking back on it, I think like, if I was to do it all over again, I probably would have just graduated college and then the very next day just gone to Europe and played there for all the years that I was trying to go to the NFL. I would have loved to have just been in Europe and traveled, and that was a really cool experience for me. I only did it for 1 year, but I got to see the world and play football at the same time, so that was awesome.
Yeah, that's incredible. It seemed to have opened up lots of kind of opportunities. And it's cool to see that with American football too, because soccer, I can understand it's kind of like globally everywhere, but I definitely wasn't aware that there was such kind of teams and institutions like that in Europe regarding American football. That's pretty sweet.
Yeah, it was. So they set it up like that. It's an American game, obviously. Like that, we're more skilled and more experienced, and so they know that, and they set it up like that. Like, So it was kind of hard to get over there because they limit the amount of what they call import players to
Yeah.
come over. If they didn't limit it, it would just be a all American league and everybody would go over there. So getting over there was a little bit tricky. You had to kind of find your way. But once you got over there, you were sort of half coach, half player. You were doing a lot of mentoring of the younger kids and the athletes. You're just trying to like grow the game. And so every country over there, at least then, this is going back to 2007. But then it was, there were leagues everywhere and some were better than the others. For me, I played in Austria and Vienna, and just an awesome city to live in, and just really just a great experience. Had some awesome relationships, saw the world. And then I hung up my cleats after that year, went back to grad school, and I've been in this world of performance enhancement ever since.
What did you love about playing American football?
Don't judge me for this, but I loved the violence of it. I really did. I was a really active, physical kid. I loved the hitting. Hitting it's a little bit of a different game now because of the head injuries and the concussions, and you know all about that. But for me, back in the day, I was really, I loved the physicality of it. I loved the violence of it. I was a punt returner, so that was like, it sort of stoked this fearlessness that I had in me, right? Like
Right.
you're catching the ball and you got 11 dudes sort of screaming down the field. And I guess it was a bit of an adrenaline rush. So I love that part of it. I love just the inherent sort of, physical nature of it that was very consistent with my personality. And then, I might be biased. I am certainly biased about this, but I think that just football is such an awesome team sport, really more than any other sport. That's arguable, of course. But for me, I love the team aspect. Is like, everybody sort of has to be in concert, and the sort of strategy and the schemes and all of the tactical part of it was really intriguing, even from a young age.
Yeah, and I'll fully admit, I like my realm would be more Irish football and soccer. So from that perspective, I can admire and enjoy the tactical side. But I can understand with American football, it is very, very intricate. And like you said, you have to really be a cohesive unit as a team. If there's one kind of chink in the armor, teams have like video footage or real time analysis on you, they'll be able to exploit that. So it really is kind of a mesh of, like you said, the physicality aspect of it, but it's also the technical and tactical and teamwork side of things.
You hit it. You're talking about it better than I could have. The physical nature of it and the sort of tactical, strategic part all sort of blended together. You get the same thing in something like hockey or rugby or even in your world. But for me, it was always football.
So you've gone from being this professional athlete to now to working with elite performers in various fields. Like, how did your experience as an athlete help shape your approach to educating and coaching others?
Yeah, I mean, after upwards of 20 years of like competitive playing, you kind of learn the ropes, right? I think that for me, I my strength as a practitioner right now is probably in my ability to relate to what it means to have a competitive spirit and balance this idea of like wanting to be a phenomenal player and wanting to at the same time grow as a person, transition from athlete to now serving athletes. I think my ability to kind of understand the competitive spirit is at the core of the work I do. I know what it means to be injured. I know what it means to want to be the best and, be critical of yourself when you're not the best. And I think that really helps when I'm dealing with athletes who like demand a whole ton out of themselves every time they step onto the field.
Do you think the landscape has changed? Do athletes demand more of themselves now, we'll say, in comparison to 20, 30, 40 years ago?
I would say no. Like, when I talk about this idea of the true athlete, that's sort of like, it's all over my website. It's right behind me here. What I mean when I say that is not the athlete that can run faster or jump higher or, lift more weights. Like, there's a whole lot of them everywhere from here to Dublin. You could find 1 million of them, right? There's a lot of those types. What I think is rare are the athletes that are like truly trying to become the best version of themselves, right? To optimize the potential. So there's a difference between like being an awesome athlete and just being faster and stronger than everybody else and really wanting to like ask a lot, the most out of yourself. And I think like athletes in the decades ago had that drive in the same exact way they do now. Perhaps it's amplified a little bit now because social media and the microscope is on everything, and there's implications to money and scholarships and all of the this sort of tricky landscape of competitive sports gets even malicious at times. But I think the true athlete has always sort of like prevailed. There's always been athletes that want the most out of themselves. And yeah, that's the athlete that I love to work with.
So the frameworks, both physical and mental, you feel have remained the same over time, but it sounds like the landscape is different, like you said, with the external pressures of social media, and maybe like there's more financial pressures on people to be successful as well. Like these might weigh a little bit heavier, but yeah, the fundamentals of trying to be a great athlete in person remain the same.
Yeah, I think a better way to explain it, or a different way to explain it, is that like inherent in all of us is this desire to grow and be better and get better. Like that's part of the human condition. And so like whether that desire to grow was on the field or off the field, I think we all always have that, right? And so, yeah, that's the foundation. That growth, that desire for excellence can and should be manifested on the field. Yeah, I think, I don't want to belabor the point anymore, but the idea is that, like, whether it was 30 years ago or today, there are people out there that are, all of us to some degree are wanting to really actualize the best version of ourselves.
Yeah, and I think that steps us out of the realm. Like we're talking from, we'll say, an athletic lens here and like high performing athletes, but what you just said is extremely translatable to everyone. Like I can translate that to me in my work life. I can translate that to me in the health habits I'm wanting to build. I think it's a really, really universal idea.
No doubt. I think you're speaking the truth. That's precisely the point I'm trying to make, and I'm dancing around here, which is like, we're all trying to be great at something. I view myself as the supporter of the individual that is on that journey.
Pete, I do really want to segue. We can dive into mental toughness in just 2 minutes, but when I was looking through your bio, one thing I actually didn't know about you at the time was the way you worked with the special operators in the US Army as a cognitive enhancement specialist. Like that sounded so exciting and intriguing to me. Like, can you tell us a bit more about that experience and how it might differ maybe from working with athletes in traditional sports?
Yes. It's undeniable. It was an amazing experience. There's some smart people around there. I had some great mentors at the time, but it was truly unique. I felt like I was at the tip of the spear of like performance psychology, working with the best of the best, these very, very elite soldiers, and the stakes were different. Right. I remember saying it almost on a daily basis, like in the Army or in, the military in general, you're not playing for wins and losses, you're playing for life and death. So everything gets amplified, like the emotional response, your ability to manage stress, belief in yourself and your skills, like all that stuff gets turned up when it's sort of like when it's put up against this the survival mechanism, the idea that like, oh man, I might lose my life here. So it was amazing. And I felt like I had to be pretty precise with how I taught the skills, and it was just a fantastic experience. But to your point, you asked a little bit about the differences between the two, and perhaps I could speak to that a bit. So I get that question a whole ton, very, very often, knowing I've worked with a lot of professional athletes in my life and been around that landscape for a long, long time. And obviously, in the world of special operations, I think the difference is, and, making a generalization, of course, the professional athlete in most cases, it almost seemed like when I walked into like an NFL locker room, like the guys were bred to be there. They're just bigger, faster, and stronger, and have been that way their entire lives. And it is like there should be in the NFL. I remember thinking to myself, like, in all my years wanting to play in the NFL, and then walking into an NFL locker room, and it was like, oh man, these guys are just different. They're just different dudes. They're so big, they're so fast, they're so strong. Immense amount of respect for what they do and what they put their bodies through. But they were just phenomenal athletes. And then, on the special operator side, I could say the same thing about their like mental and psychological makeup. Like they were just so damn tough, like they believed so much and they had such conviction, and they made the job almost easy because mental toughness was like who they were. Yeah, I want to just stop right there, but I think that's the big thing that stood out, sort of like these really physical skills on the pro athlete side, and these really tangible mental skills on the toughness in general on the soldier side.
How would you describe mental toughness?
Yeah, that's a big question right there. So the way that I describe mental toughness is like this. I'll put it in sort of a phrase. It's the ability to experience something that is stressful, right? And let me like just pause right there for a second and say, like, that stress it is subjective, right? So something that is subjectively distressing, right? What's hard for me might not be that hard for you. So that's a key point right there. So it's the experience of something that you perceive as stressful, and then the ability to respond to that stress with some self-control, with some belief, so that you can respond in congruence with who you are and your core values. So let me just say that again and try to spell it out a little bit cleaner. It's the ability to respond to a subjectively distressing event with some belief and some willpower, and in accordance with your core values, and in a way that's congruent with yourself. And so, like, some of the main dimensions here are like adversity, right? Like toughness doesn't turn on without adversity. So there needs to be adversity. The other dimensions are self-control, belief, and values, core values. I think that value piece is worth diving into, because that's the part that is not that sexy and you don't see it on Instagram. Yeah, that's the part that gets missed a whole lot.
Let's dive into the concept of core values. So are you saying like there needs to be a sense of alignment, like someone needs to put a lot of introspective thought into the type of person they are in order to make decisions that are in line with them?
You're exactly right. That's precisely
I got it right, folks.
That's precisely how I think about it. There is this world of mental toughness that demands that you do that self-reflection and that introspection, and you answer the question, what the hell do I stand for? Like that's at the foundation of mental toughness. When you have that, what do I stand for? Who am I? What are my core values? This is a really, I say this to athletes all the time. I call it the view from the stands. And it goes like this, like, if I was watching me play, or if you were watching you play from the stands, what would you want to see? How would you want that podge to be behaving and responding? And that's a really good way to get in touch with the stuff that you value, these principles that uniquely, podge, and that you want to organize your life around, right? Maybe it's leadership. Maybe it's creativity. Maybe it's love. Maybe it's bravery or courage, right? For me, like, simplicity and stillness and being kind of down regulated is a big value. Like, how do I want to show up like that? How do I want other people how will they know that those are in fact my values? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so, uh, yeah, I think that's a good way to kind of connect with your values and, understand a little bit on a deeper level what you do and why you do it.
Yeah, it sounds like, am I correct in saying that would be the first, like almost the first critical component if you were working with an athlete that you would look to dive into, is essentially finding out not only who they are, but them also finding out who they are or who they want to be.
Yeah, Podge. The very first thing that I ask of every athlete that I work with is get a journal. Like, start that conversation with yourself about yourself. I think it's critical. I really believe, in my heart of hearts, I believe that when things get tough and adversity strikes and you're in this sort of stressful environment, if you excuse me, if you know what you stand for, playing from a different place. And I think that is of like utmost importance.
It's amazing how we're speaking through like a sporting lens, but I've had other people kind of speaking through whether it's a habit formation lens. I had a guest on recently talking about like how to suffer effectively, and it just kind of blows my mind how there's so many connections and similarities. Like, I think the journaling aspect allows you to, well, one, put your personal thoughts, but also allows you to like look a small bit more objectively as to what you were saying, so you're not too involved emotionally. Joe, you can pull apart and go like, okay, this is what I'm saying is who I want to be as Podge. I'm able to think a bit more through that. Is that the person I want to be, versus being so entrenched emotionally you can't make those decisions.
Yeah, you're picking up on so many like core things that believe in, like, philosophically, when it comes to being a good athlete or being a good person. And I think one thing you're talking about is this idea of the small space between the things that happen to you and how you react to them. And I think, like, I don't know if you've ever read Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl book.
Not yet, but I
You
will
got
now.
to. That is a life-changing book. But the way that he describes it is like there's this space between stimulus and response, and our job is to sort of master that space. That is also at the core of mental toughness. Like, if not, like that, you either don't master that space right before, like right in between when something happens to you on the field and how you react to it. That small space. If you don't master that, what you're doing is you're just getting ragdolled by life, by the game, by everything that happens to you. Something good happens, you feel great. Something bad
Yeah.
happens, you feel bad. Something good, and you're just on this roller coaster, getting whipped around by the game or by life. Alternatively, you can just sort of watch yourself in that moment, right? And like a moment of meditation on the sidelines necessarily, it's a brief instance where you're like, okay, like, let me sort of like regulate, man. Let me take a deep breath. Let me sort of be in the moment for a hot second and respond in a way that's more congruent with the values that we were talking about.
Yeah, and there's one, as you were speaking, I'm obviously advancing in my own career and close to retirement playing wise, so trying to make that transition into coaching of Irish football and soccer. But one key thing I would actually look out for from someone is, when you lose the ball, what's their initial knee-jerk thing? Is it hands in the air, standing still, screw it? Or is it, okay, that phase is over, now we have to try and get the ball back, so you kind of work extra harder? I like the concept of suffering in this case. Like, the soccer team I support is Arsenal, and their manager Arteta is like really hones in on the importance of like suffering. Like, he uses it as a positive tool, and he uses it as a team building. Like, if we lose the ball, or we'll say do something that's not great, like, we now have to suffer together as a reactionary part of the game to losing the ball. So let's work together as a team and just try get it back, kind of focus on the next phase versus dwelling in what just happened.
Yeah. I love that. The way that I phrase it and the way I think about it is like you're sort of embracing the hardship. You're sort of in the realness of the moment, right? You're sort of this idea of like suffering together is a cool thought. Like collectively, you're kind of leaning into being down for a moment, and how can you sort of like crawl yourself back out of that hole. And and another sort of core tenet of mental toughness is that ability to kind of embrace the hardship, and on a team that harder and sometimes it's easier.
Yeah, it probably depends on the team. Like I personally would think it would be a lot harder if you're playing a singular sport like tennis or something. If like it's you alone. There's probably like a whole bunch of people if it's a big game watching you. Golf is another big one. That's why golf is such a mental game as well. Like the individual side of things can make it really hard. I think the collective, if you have the right environment, is way more supportive.
Yes, I would agree with that. Golf, tennis, pitching, in baseball, shooting free throws, like all of that, that they're like so reflective of your mental game, right? If your mind is off when you're trying to hit a golf ball, that it's unlikely that that ball is going to go where you want it to go.
Pete, what's the biggest misconception people have about mental toughness, in your
Yeah,
opinion?
yeah. It's a great, just a sweet question. So the question I get all the time is like, what do you think of David Goggins? Because I get it so when often with athletes and with teams, I get that question a ton. So I obviously don't know David Goggins. I haven't even read his book, but he's all over social media and he's doing his thing, being tough. And so to answer your question a little bit more directly is like, I believe he's tough because he's such a principled human being, right? He's so self possessed. He knows he knows what he stands for, and he's unapologetic about it. And so I think people get lost in like the the grind of mental toughness, and the fact that you have to sort of bury yourself, dominate the competition, come out on the other side victorious, and all of a sudden you're better, and you've imposed your will on everybody else, and you've beat the competition. I think that is the misconception, that there's toughness in that. Of course, like you can't deny the fact that like, man, you gotta rub some dirt on it, and you gotta wipe the blood off your face, and you have to go through the fight and work your ass off and do all the things that people, believe are synonymous with mental toughness. And I'm not saying that that's not mental toughness. It very much is. However, it's a small corner that gets sensationalized because it looks good and sounds good and whatnot. But I believe that the true mental toughness is this idea of being unbelievably self-aware, knowing what you stand for, knowing what you believe in, and then turning yourself on and turning yourself up when the lights are the brightest.
Yeah, I think that's a really good response to it as well. And a few things that stood out for me. One, it sounded very isolating, like you got to do it yourself. And I think there's a societal pressures and norms even around that. Like if something's going wrong, like you have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and make it happen, make it work for you. Whereas the reality is maybe if you have a supportive team around you, you can actually leverage people in your life to help you get to where you need to go. So it doesn't always have to be in isolation. I think that might be something people get wrong too when they're like in a quote unquote rut or need to try and like build a business. They might say, "Oh, I have to do everything myself," versus reaching out and trying to get support in that aspect as well.
Yeah. I think they call it like rugged individualism, and it's such a certainly maybe more in America than anywhere else, is like, it's my world. I'm going to make it happen. I'm going to prove everybody wrong. And I think there's a whole lot to be said about what you're saying is like, mentally tough people, they don't like have no fear, right? They don't not think negatively. They don't only have positive thoughts in their mind. They have all of that stuff. They just know exactly how to respond to it. They know exactly what they're made of. They know exactly who to lean on when, to your point about like, having a support system around you.
Kind of ties back into what you were saying regarding the space in between the stimulus and the response, right? How do you operate in that moment?
Yeah, right on.
Pete, we spoke about with mental toughness. I think we gave a few practical strategies. Well, you gave a few practical strategies around journaling being a key one, kind of in search of your core beliefs and your values. But are there any other practical strategies or approaches you think that individuals can use to develop kind of mental toughness? And I guess especially in high pressure environments too.
So I love the practicality of the question. So yes, like journaling, understanding yourself, sort of putting your phone down and being in the silence and being okay with, uh, you know, being uncomfortable, I think is a huge one. So I think, when it comes to being really, really practical about mental toughness, along with journaling and having the conversation with yourself about yourself. I think leaning into the daily things that are difficult for you throughout your life, right? Like this is, like cold plunging, right? I'm sure you've heard so much about that. Like it's arguable the physiological impacts of getting yourself into a cold tub. The What I believe is undeniable 30 seconds walking up to the cold plunge. It's like you can't deny that. The fact is that you're willingly going to do something that you know is difficult. And so if you can place yourself in that situation, be strategic, be intentional about doing some hard things in your life. Maybe it's a cold plunge, maybe it's having a hard conversation, maybe it's the workout. But if you like, hard times builds mental toughness. There's no denying that, right? It's not the only thing that builds it, but if you want to get like really practical about gaining some toughness, it's like get used to responding and knowing how you respond from difficult things in your life.
So that would mean being in stressful situations, obviously once it's not chronic, we'll say long-term stress, which could lead to anxiety and a lot of other issues. Like you're kind of saying that being in a stressful environment at times can be a positive thing, and it really is the catalyst for growth.
Yeah. I think so. I mean, like it is growth, right? Like by definition, you need to be bumped up against some resistance so that you can grow. The way I think about like being mindful about gaining mental toughness is like you should be strategic about it, right? You should be strategic about how you put stress in your life. You should be like have varied types of stressors, right? Mental stressors, physical stressors, emotional stressors, like bury yourself in the stress. I'm just saying, like, be mindful of leaning into those moments during your life. Yeah. So strategic, varied, and intentional about, doing stuff that is difficult often.
I think you're kind of just touching on where my next thought was going when you mentioned intentional. I've observed like people I've played sports with, I've been in this mode myself for a period of time, but sometimes whether it's sport, whether it's life, it's almost like a going through the motions piece. And I know that because I see people that I play sport with and myself that 2 or 3 years might go by and I'm still doing the same things as, in this case, as an athlete. I'm still maybe making the same mistakes, or I still have the same limitations physically or mentally that I perhaps haven't worked on. It's just interesting. I think, especially in a sporting environment, it can be easy to just kind of coast. Maybe that's the wrong phrase, but you're not like mentally, you're not self-aware. Maybe during training, you're kind of just going through the motions and doing what you have to do because it's what you've always done. Whereas what you're saying is there should be a real intent. We spoke from the lens of like developing intention, like intentionally putting stressors to help us grow. But it seems like that concept of being intent in your practice and just intent in the goals you want to achieve is a crucial aspect when it comes to mental toughness, but also when it comes to kind of your mindset training and performance.
Yeah. To that last point right there, I think the idea of mindset training is in fact, this sort of structured process growth, of gaining mental and mental strength and having a durable mindset. So a lot of the athletes that I work with they do some of this stuff, right? Like, man, they say the right things to themselves at the right time, and they take a breath before they shoot the foul shot, and they do some of this stuff. But this idea of intentionality and doing it on purpose, I think, is really, really valuable. But it gets to the point where, what's really necessary to mention is that, you don't want to be thinking about breathing when you're trying to play, right? You know what? Like
You
that,
have
that's
enough
not the
going
point.
on.
So this idea of mental toughness and the idea of confidence, it's a tool, right? It's not the end game. I'm not trying to be the most mentally tough here. I'm not trying to be the most confident here. I'm trying to be the most present and the most focused. And so that all of this stuff is sort of like a means to an end. It's giving you the ability to be at your best when you need to be, when you're up against something that really, really matters to you.
Human beings, Pete, we're so complex, and you often see in sport someone might play a game and like shoot the lights out or be the man of the match, the MVP, be absolutely unbelievable, and then they could come out next week and it's like this is not the same person. They're totally different. They're switched off. They're not tuned into what they're doing. Like they quote like suck for a better phrase. Like they had a brutal game, and I think a lot of people attribute that to confidence. That's the phrase you might often hear. Oh, this person's lacking confidence. They can't get it going. What's your idea on confidence, and maybe what strategies do you recommend for building and maintaining confidence, especially after a setback or poor performances?
Yeah. So confidence, the way I define it in a phrase, the ability to tell yourself an empowering story about yourself in any situation you find yourself. All right. So the ability to say the right thing at the right time, essentially. So there's the way that I think about confidence is like, and to your example about the person that is on one game and off the other. I wish I had the answer to that, like, conundrum. I really don't know. That idea of consistency is an ever elusive thing in all levels of sport. But as far as confidence goes, like the way I think about it is there's sort of two layers to confidence. There's this really rational, logical layer that most people lean on, and they sort of stop right there at confidence. And so this is going back to the like Albert Bandura's self-efficacy stuff. It's like, okay, vicarious experiences, modeling past experiences. So to say it a little bit more cleanly, it's like, did I do it in the past? Right? I did it before. I know I could do it again. Right? That's so logical. It makes sense. Of course, a past experience would lead to confidence. Another thing is like, when you're talking about somebody who, when you're talking to somebody you really, really trust. They told me I could do it. Yeah, man. Like they say, oh, Pete, I know you can lift that. I know you can score. I know you can do that thing. It's like, okay, of course, that makes so much sense. This person whose opinion I value so much, is telling me that I can do it. Yeah, of course that'll breed some confidence. Or another one is like, hey, they did it, and I'm just as good as they are. I know I could do it. All logical, right? I've done it before. Somebody told me I could do it. Somebody like me did it. All of these things make so much sense. It's right in line with Albert Bandura's frameworks on self-belief and self-efficacy, and they undoubtedly fuel confidence. My thinking is that there's a whole other layer to confidence, and that is like exactly how I explained it a second ago, which is, there's this true confidence which doesn't have to lean on all of this logical stuff. when none of these things are in place, I haven't done it in the past, when nobody believes in me, when there are few reasons for me to believe, can I still say the right thing at the right time?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a total choice. That I believe is true confidence, when you can tell yourself that empowering story at any moment in time, regardless. A perfect example is Conor McGregor, right? This
Who,
dude,
who's he? Nice. I
this
joke.
dude, he is the pride of Ireland, right?
Interesting phrase, Pete. Yeah, it depends who you talk to. Absolutely.
So, but he's, love him or hate him, his psychological and mental makeup is
Yeah.
uncanny. It's unbelievable. This dude, he can get knocked out in front of the world and come on and still talk about how he's the best of the best. It's like none of Muhammad Ali was the same way, right? Like there's these athletes out there that just choose to believe. That's their default setting,
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's absolutely fascinating. So the way I think about confidence is the same way I think about strength and speed, right? Everybody on this planet can get a little bit stronger and they can get a little bit faster. Everyone, every single one of us can get a little bit stronger and a little bit faster. Will all of us be as fast as Noah Lyles, right? Hell no, absolutely not. But we can all get a little bit faster. So I think about confidence in the exact same way. I think about toughness in the exact same way. We can all get a little bit more confident. We can all get a little bit tougher. We can all we can choose. This is a conscious decision, a literal phrase to say to yourself and believe it, that like, hey, I can pull this off even when there's few reasons to believe.
You might be able to dissect this from my personal view, but you mentioned about I can believe it. I find if I have been honest with myself and we'll say, if I have a big game in a final, I'm really confident and good when I know I've done the block of work. So I keep reinforcing to myself, like, you've done the block of work. Now it's the enjoyment time. Now it's time to go off and show off almost what it's almost like peacocking a bit, like show off what you have done over the last years or months. Like this is your opportunity to showcase that. But you can have the opposite internally, like, in being truthful with yourself. There's been games where I know I've not done the body of work, and I'm not saying I'm going to come out and play terrible. It's like, I just know I haven't done it. I'm going to do my best, but there's kind of almost like that self-awareness that I haven't prepared as well as I could, and I'm almost doing myself an injustice, or almost letting myself down. I don't know if that's something you enter or come
Yeah.
across.
Yeah. It's awesome, Podge. Like, great stuff. Like when you believe, when you put in the work. So I think the best way to think about it, to sort of consolidate what you're saying, you have to earn the right to believe, right? You have to earn the right to be able to say to yourself the right thing at the right time, to give yourself these empowering statements and these empowering stories. So like, confidence is born out of hard work. It's born out of the preparation. So if you have that grounding of hard work and you've been honest with yourself, and you have every right to believe in yourself, right? I've put in the work. I've made the progress. My effort was always there. And the idea is not like, hey, I know I'll win, because you don't know you can,
Mm-hmm.
you will win, right? My work with athletes is that's another core tenet. It's like, or this doesn't guarantee success. It just guarantees that you'll bring your very best, what you're capable of, the work, the thing that you're working towards. You'll bring your very best to that moment, and then that's all you can ask, right?
Seems like for some that could be a tough line. Like, how can athletes develop a strong sense of belief without crossing into overconfidence, which might negatively affect or impact their performance?
Yeah. Or, I mean, confidence is so tricky, right? Like, too much of it and you're just living not in reality, too little of it, and you undermine your efforts. But yeah, I believe there's something as overconfidence, but when and when you're dealing with somebody with an athlete who's overconfident, that can get exposed really quickly.
In your practice, like one-to-one practice, you can expose that.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm talking more generally, like on the field,
Yeah.
right?
Oh,
Like
yeah. On the
it
field, yeah, it's pretty. I think it is pretty obvious.
is really obvious really quickly the people who are self-assured and know what they're about and are playing from this sort of space of true confidence that is unshakable, and the people that are just talking about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one thing I think why I love about sports is really hard to mask. I think the preparation work you've done, your natural characteristic, how you react from setbacks, how resilient are you? I think a sports field, like of any sport, it's really just a playground or a place for these to really showcase themselves in. I know there's like win or lose, like there's some jeopardy, but as in the reality of life, it's similar to you working with the army. Like this is not life and death situation. So I think that's one of the beauties of sport is it helps you develop these characteristics in, we'd say, like a safe environment with some jeopardy, but at the end of the day, it's only winning and losing a match.
Yeah. And I would say that like the biggest thing at stake in athletics is like the big threat is like, what are they all going to think of me? Right? It's the self-image, and your ego takes the hit more than anything else. So that's a thing to grapple with athletes, a ton of the athletes that I work with, right? Like they're so defined by themselves as the athlete. Yeah, I think there's something to be said about pinning your self-worth to something other than a win or a loss.
Yeah, you're kind of getting them to think bigger picture in terms of this is where it ties back into like their own personal growth and development, the areas they're wanting to work on with their game versus it being specifically I've won and I've lost. Because as you said, every team, every person you're competing with wants the same thing, and not everyone can win the trophy either. There's always going to be just one winner at the end of the year, most likely.
Totally. And what's cool to think about is like everybody wants to win. Like you step on the field to win. That's the point here. We all want to win, but like I talk to athletes all the time, and the when the big goal is winning, that's valuable, and I can't you can't trivialize that. That's the reason why we play, or a big huge reason why we play. But it can't just be the only reason why we play. If that's the case, then like you're missing a whole opportunity for growth. You're also missing the very thing that could separate you from all the other athletes. Like everybody from here to Los Angeles wants to win. So that will to succeed, it's making you the same as everybody else. But what makes you different is how we started this conversation, is like understanding what you stand for and why you do the things you do and connecting to your sources of motivation. I think when you have that, then you're playing for the win, but you're also playing for ideals, and you're playing for community, and you're playing for something that's a little bit bigger than yourself.
Is that a readjustment you have to help athletes make often? Do they come to you and you say, "What's your goals?" and they say, "I want to win the championship," and you have to like take help them take a step back to see the bigger picture?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's not an athlete out there that comes to me and doesn't have that mindset. And like, it's hard to talk about it in this way because it's a good mindset to have. Like, you go for it, right? Pull it off. Be the one, be the man, be the woman. But it's also like, it comes with so much pressure, right?
Mhm.
If I don't win this game, like the implied message from the athlete is, if I don't win this game, who the hell am I?
Yeah, I'm not
Right?
good enough.
Yeah, I'm not good enough. And so like it can be the, again, I'm rephrasing or restating myself here, but like it can be the big thing, and it should be the big thing, especially like in the world of elite athletics, when like, money and reputation are really on the line and contracts are on the line. Like it can always be the big thing, but it can't be the only thing, right? There's got to be something more that you're playing from.
I would almost look at it through the lens of it's an indicator. I think if you're winning or you're getting close to finals or you're like achieving and going far in competitions, like that to me is an indicator that the things you are doing are putting you onto the right path, because you have to take into account too. You also have the variables that you might be doing everything you can do right into your best of the ability, but you might be just be coming across an athlete or a team that are absolutely outrageous and once in a lifetime generation team. And at some point, a lot of that is out of your control. I mean, you can use them as a pedestal and something to maybe aspire to and learn from, but sometimes the winning might be out of your control. But I like to think of trophies and stuff as almost like an outcome, like an indicator or a secondary based off the foundation and the groundwork that you've laid down to get there.
Yeah. I mean, if you talk about it in like goal setting terms, it's like the process versus the outcome. You know, you can't deny the outcome. That's valuable stuff. But if you're missing the process and the growth and all of the other inherently valuable things about participating in sport, like that's where the beauty is, you know?
Yeah, yeah. The journey is definitely an important one. And if it's a team sport, I suppose the people you were on the journey with is like that's what you remember. You probably will walk down the street, and if you bump into a buddy you've played football with in the past, like you'll both look at each other and maybe give the nod of acknowledgement. You know, you've been through some stuff together. You've had some really good experiences together too. So
Okay, so we were talking about this idea of camaraderie, and you know, having this sort of shared struggle with somebody, and you're talking about this idea of like walking down the street, and it spurred me to this really cool experience that I had. So I played arena football for a couple years here in the States. Arena football is just on a small field, and I don't know if you've seen it or
no, but it sounds absolutely intense. A
yeah,
smaller
very
field.
intense, much different game, but awesome. I loved it. Played with some really awesome guys. It was a short stint in my career, but played close to 20 years ago. I was walking through the airport. I was with my family. You know, my daughters were really young at the time. I was with my wife, and we were going through security. And I walked past this dude, and he screams out. He's like, "White Lightning." My nickname was White Lightning at the time. And so the whole like airport security line like witnesses us reconnecting after like 20 years of not seeing one another and sort of recognizing each other from afar. And so every once in a while, my wife and I will revisit that story. Like, remember when that dude called you White Lightning from across the
Literally
security line?
shouting across. Oh man.
But it was so awesome. Like, it brought me right back to that moment. Like, man, this guy I hadn't seen him in 20 years, but he was a brother at the time.
Yeah, you do. You remained those connections remain with you throughout your life. And I experienced the same with people in secondary school I would have played Irish football with, or people I grew up playing soccer with as well. Like you kind of do give that either nod or acknowledgement. I haven't got a shout across the road or through a security line just yet, but I await the day.
My wife gets a kick out of that story.
It's a great, no, that's a really good story. Uh, Pete, I know just being conscious of time, let's wind down this conversation. Are there any key takeaways you have for our listeners here when it comes to the topics we discussed around mindset training, when it comes to and mental toughness, confidence, or any other aspects?
Yeah. So I think inner dialogue is kind of key here. And first becoming aware of that inner dialogue, I think, is really, really critical. And I believe we have total control and should have command over that conversation in our heads. And I think once we become aware and can use it to our benefit, I think that like you're speaking from a place of like true mental toughness. So perhaps a really practical way to better explain this is like, how do you know you have it, right? Like, okay, all this stuff is good. I journal a lot and I say the right things at the right time. And, I'm robust when I'm up against stressors. Like, but like, how do I actually know that I have it? And I think there's a couple things that you could point towards. One is when you recognize that your confidence is internally derived, right? Like it's coming from you. It's not coming from
Mhm.
anyone else. Another big one is like when you see yourself resetting from errors quicker and better, right? Like you have a system for like, oh man, that went wrong, but I'm back in action. I think that's another sort of telltale indicator that you're working with some true mental toughness. Another one is like you're not defined by wins and losses, right? That doesn't mean that you're not emotional about the game. It doesn't mean that you don't care and you're apathetic or indifferent. It just means that like you don't get buried by wins and losses, right? Your identity is not pinned.
Yeah, I really like those as well. And mine would have centered around the alignment piece that we discussed near the beginning of the conversation. And it ties in what you said. It's, yeah, what we're talking about here isn't about going out onto a pitch or trying to develop a habit or trying to succeed in whatever way and go, oh, I didn't win. That's okay. Like, that's not what we're talking about. I think you still need to have that kind of ruthless aggression to go out and win like during the match, but then it's about analyzing after, like self-reflecting. How do I build from here, whether you win or lose? And that might be actually something people fall victim to, is when you're winning you don't tend to really analyze yourself at all because you're winning, but then there's one loss that occurs out of 10 and you like scrutinize the life out of it. Whereas I think you should be kind of equally balanced, whether you're winning or losing. What can I take, how can I learn, how can I develop, without tying yourself to the win or the loss.
Right on. Absolutely. I think you're speaking the truth.
Pete, what an absolute pleasure. I've been wanting to have this podcast for an incredibly long time. Truth be told, the second I decided I was going to do a podcast, you were one of the first people that came into my mind to have a conversation with. So, huge bucket list moment for me, and just want to thank you so much for your time and chatting with us.
Yeah, you got it. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it was a pleasure to be on here, and I hope you got something from it. I hope the listeners got something from it. And yeah, thanks for the opportunity. It's cool.
Yeah, and you're welcome anytime. Just to close out today's conversation, of course, we're listening to Pete Athans. And if you do have any questions for Pete around mindset training for the true athlete, and Pete, I don't know if you want to let people know where they can find you with your website or online.
Yeah. So website is just athansperformance.com. That's my last name, Athans, athansperformance.com. Yeah, there's some resources there. And then on Instagram, a whole ton, Athans_performance.
I know from your online profile now, I know you're building it up, but you really do leave some really cool videos there talking around mindset and talking about kind of athletic performance as well. So do highly recommend people to give that a follow and to check it out too. All right. Thank you so much again, Pete. Thank you so much, folks. I will be back with you again tomorrow at 8 a.m. Eastern time. This, of course, will be live on Noon Vibe straight after live on Noon Vibe. This, of course, will be available on Noon Vibe the second we log out of here, and this will be available on our social media in the coming weeks. So if you do want to give that a follow, click my name, you click my link tree and find all of our social media accounts from there. And if you've liked what you heard, feel free to drop a follow on Noon Vibe, which is just underneath my name too. Of course, if you have any questions or concerns, drop me a DM. If there are any future topics you'd like to hear, if there's something you want Pete to discuss in the future and come back on, let me know in my DMs and we can get that sorted for you all too. All right, take care and have a good rest of your day. See you, folks.
See you.